I mean, proof of work is proof of waste. You can argue that, the consensus that is derived from the fact that you are proving that you're doing more waste than anyone else, but it's still waste. There are better ways of doing it.
Welcome to the Sub-Zero in Bangkok edition of A Glass with Gav. So we're coming from Bangkok after the finish of the Sub-Zero conference, which is the Polkadot Developer Conference.
Yeah.
And very well attended. A lot of news in the conference, especially from you.
No, no.
What would you see as the big success?
I think when we start seeing applications sitting on Polkadot that have mass market appeal, that materially alter people's lives for the better, we can pat ourselves on the back and say, yeah, good job. At the moment, it's not clear how far this technology needs to develop before it will reach that point of being able to host use cases. And I mean, there's an argument that maybe the technology is already there and it's just we haven't thought of the right use cases yet. There's an argument that the use cases exist, the technology isn't there yet, and there's an argument that both exist and it's just we don't know it. It's happening behind the scenes. You know, we saw with the internet, we saw a couple of, we saw a boom bust cycle, right? We saw the dot-com boom in 98, 99, and we saw a lot of firms collapse before, the Facebooks started planting and taking off. In this case, the use cases were there, and there were even users. It outpaced itself. It got a little bit too far too fast. It went a little bit too far along the use case trajectory before the technology was there to support it. There were YouTube equivalents in 98, 99, 2000 that fell flat on their face. Not because they didn't receive funding and not because they weren't a good idea, just because the technology wasn't around to be able to deliver people
the
video.
Infrastructure wasn't there, right? Try doing video and dial-up is not good.
And I mean, it's easy to imagine when you think of infrastructure. I think there's a few things. I think infrastructure is one of them. I think there's also technology. There were APIs and protocols that weren't used, widely known. There were certain network effects that didn't exist. And I think there's also that classic adage, people just weren't ready for it. If you rewind back to like 98, 99, and it's like, oh, suddenly you can order your groceries on the internet. It's like, no, that's crazy. That's sci-fi. No, it could never work. The world has to change a little bit first before people will change. It's sort of it's a sort of left foot, right foot thing.
And do you have an idea of what a reasonable path for blockchain would be?
I mean, we can only look at history. I mean, I've lived through a couple of technological periods of evolution, through the sort of 8-bit, 16-bit home computer progression, and I lived through the internet progression. I see parallels in blockchain to both. There were a lot of different companies throwing their hats in, trying to create a platform that people wanted to produce software for. Also, people in the home market wanted to buy, and a lot of factors, fairly similar factors, I would say, to blockchain. There was a lot of consolidation. Basically, there was an explosion of these brands in the early 80s, and by the mid to late 80s, there were basically 3. And then again, there was another round of consolidation, and then you ended up with PCs. I mean, Macs were running throughout. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to sort of try and find these analogies, and I think there's a few different points of similarity we can make. We're in the hobbyist era. Most people, if you ask them about you use blockchain, they'll be like, probably get a similar answer to if you ask them in '83, do you have a PC? It's like, well, why would I want a PC?
Like, no, don't have a wallet, never use it.
I do think there is important stuff to be learned from history, whether we can really use it to make very accurate predictions on the short-term basis. Don't know, probably not. I think the arc narrative probably will remain the same. There probably will be consolidation. There probably will be extinction events. And there probably will be something that is the outsider and looks like it should be extinct, but actually there's some hidden principle that's operating towards that keeps it in the game all the way to the end.
Have we had extinction events in blockchain? I think so.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember Feathercoin?
Yeah. Plenty have faded away.
If businesses don't make profit for for a significant period of time, then they will go bust.
Yeah.
Investors will pull the plug. And as you say, with open source projects, that's less of an issue. And particularly with blockchain, there was enough capital in the major seed dispersal events. Mm-hmm. So the ground is fertile enough for the weeds to keep growing regardless of what the environmental factors are.
The massive extinction events, mostly through leverage and fraud.
Oh yeah, yeah, like
next to blockchain, but not actually about blockchain.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there is that element of things. But I would say if you consider something who's, if the market cap falls, beyond the 20, 30x as an extinction event,
mm-hmm.
then you can probably find a few extinction events.
And as a path forward, it'll rhyme with PC era, right? So consolidation, and then a new paradigm for how blockchain works, maybe sort of, for a simpler point of view, like Bitcoin mm-hmm. is still there, still going strong, proof of work, mm-hmm. Ethereum as the next generation, which is now proof of stake, and we could do much more with. And then things like Polkadot, which are super flexible and super performant, and hopefully also super adoptable.
This is an interesting one, whether the generations lie. And Bitcoin is for sure first generation. I think Bitcoin has a sort of carte blanche in that it's less about the technology and more about the token. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin, it's not that Bitcoin exists as any real useful technological platform. Now, of course, people have tried to add technology to the Bitcoin platform. Taproot, I think, is one of them. Maybe that's a bit old now. SegWit, yeah. I mean, SegWit, to be fair, is an upgrade of Bitcoin, but SegWit, I mean, at its core, basically just relaxes the checks that validators have to do. It essentially just reduces the security of Bitcoin in order to allow for it to, quote unquote, verify or host things beyond token transfers. There are adjuncts. Lightning would be another one. That sort of a technological adjunct to Bitcoin, to the Bitcoin protocol. They're not part of the protocol, mm-hmm. but they do add something to it. I think taking Bitcoin in and of itself, it's prehistoric. Like blockchain speaking, it's prehistoric, right? I mean, nothing should be using proof of work anymore. This is fucking up the world. But, they are, and they're largely because of, zealotry and religion.
But also, there's a value to it, right? Otherwise it wouldn't be there. And then the value being that it's not censorable and it's not permissioned.
Yeah, but the same is true for many other consensus mechanisms. You don't need to waste energy. I mean, proof of work is proof of waste, right? Mm-hmm. The work, it's not work that's being done usefully. It's like building a bridge to nowhere. And you can argue that the people who are working on it are doing work, but broadly speaking, when there is work done, there is a problem being solved, there is a solution being created. In Bitcoin's case, the work that is being done is, in fact, waste. Mm-hmm. Now, you can argue that the consensus that is derived from the fact that you are proving that you're doing more waste than anyone else, but it's still waste. Right. You're still burning energy for nothing. Proof of waste is a fossil fuel of consensus. Mm-hmm. There are better ways of doing it. Pretending that there isn't is a bit like saying my energy is better because it comes from a coal-powered power station or I burnt wood for it. My train ride is better because the locomotive in front is a wood-burning locomotive, not an electric locomotive. Anyway, that we can agree on at least is the first generation, absolutely. And then you got the second generation, with which I think you can reasonably argue that the second generation brought with it things like more flexibility over what logic you can execute. Programmable money, right? As Ethereum was called. And I would say part of the second generation is this proof of stake. The third generation is an interesting one. Now, I would say with a third generation, there are probably a few things yet to solve. Scalability being a notable one, right? So I would say second generation chains are not scalable. Now, of course, there are fudges, right? You can do say, well, everything needs to run on this specific hardware in this specific data center with this specific connectivity. And by the way, we'll keep basically a root channel open so that we can tell everyone to shut down and upgrade and revert and all the rest of it if we need to, right? So you can basically bring it halfway to Microsoft Azure or AWS and just say, well, we're going to actually centralize everything. Good luck convincing the SEC that you're actually a decentralized protocol and not just a money laundering operation. But beyond that,
can you make the cut?
But beyond, if you want to do something, in following on from what made crypto a thing at all, from what made from the roots of Web3. Then you've got to stay actually decentralized.
What could standardize blockchain?
Adoption and technological formats. So OpenGL is a format. You can buy a book and it's got all of OpenGL in it. And if you want to implement something in OpenGL, make a new graphics card, you just do it according to that book. Okay. If we go back to what constitutes a third generation blockchain, we have the idea potentially that scalability would be of the decentralized blockchains, of the ones that actually care about being resilient or unstoppable. We have probably scalability as the single key improvement that these things can do, which is to say processing more stuff. Now, the way that Ethereum is achieving this is a bit of a hack. I mean, you can argue, I would say quite forcefully, that Ethereum hasn't achieved it at all. Yes, they've moved to a proof-of-stake system rather than a proof-of-work system, so they're burning a bit less energy, burning quite a lot less energy. But in terms of overall transaction volume, it's still a synchronous chain. It's still one shard. Now, there are some ideas, and there have been, I would say, more ambitious ideas in the past of what Ethereum could turn into. None of them have transpired, and as far as I know, the last time I checked what they were doing, the ideas had basically simmered down into, we'll leave Ethereum as a single proof-of-stake chain.
What would be the impetus to change it? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
One of Vitalik's recent blog posts at the end of last year focused on building real applications for real people, like Web3, build some Web3 stuff. And, there are a few examples of people trying to do this, but I think broadly speaking, his tone was one of lament. It's been 10 years, and really, the world of Web3 is still in its infancy. And a big problem is not having the volume or the correct price point for doing consensus computation at. You can't do enough of it, and you can't do it for cheap enough. Now, nowhere is that more true than the Ethereum main chain. It's ludicrously expensive, so much so that people are using all sorts of chains of questionable security that are sort of pushing themselves as scaling solutions for Ethereum. Now, there's some hope that fancy cryptography can help with this. I get asked about ZK snark-based solutions for scaling a lot, and the reality is that there is some mileage there, but they are extremely expensive for what they do. And they also have numerous...
expensive how?
So if you measure how much computation you need to do per transaction, like the cost of that computation, I should really say, per transaction that you were doing in addition to what you would have been doing anyway, Using ZK snarks to do that costs orders of magnitude more than just getting a bunch of validators that are heavily staked and have them cryptographically randomly checking things and have a couple of them put up all of that stake if it's wrong. It turns out to be wrong, right? This is a very, very simple crypto-economic solution that Polkadot uses. It has very clear security implications, provisions. It's tractable and it works, and it's fast and it's cheap. Whereas using fancy cryptography is centralized, slow, takes ages to get anything done, and very, very, very expensive. And if you want any kind of resilience against, say, an actor just wandering off, going down, being incompetent, getting hacked, being malevolent, then you'll have to double, triple, 10x that already huge cost to
Which
provide
is already a
redundancy.
huge obstacle to adoption.
Which is already a huge. And of course, these ZK sidechains will mask that cost with their market cap. They'll basically just swallow the costs for this stuff. But they won't be able to do that forever. And ZK is not the cryptography. You'll find optimists that'll be like, oh, in a year or two it'll come down by 100 or 1,000x. And it's like, yeah, maybe. Probably not, but possibly.
Right.
I can't say for sure that you're wrong, but so far there is no reason to believe that you're right.
Right.
And right now, we can do. If you compare actual on the ground real numbers, RISC-0 ZK VM that does the RISC-V instruction set compared to just running RISC-V 30 times with randomly selected, well-staked validators, you have an order of a cost order of running into the tens of millions.
What?
Yeah, so tens of millions times more expensive to do it using ZK. It's not like 500%.
How is that sustainable?
I don't think it is. But, at the moment, the crypto ecosystem is going off, whizzy-bang presentations and difficult to understand maths, not actual numbers. Now, of course, RISC-0, small print RISC-0, being an actual practical delivered project probably isn't at the very, very cutting edge, and there probably are projects that are delivering a degree of this similar technology cheaper or faster, but they're going to have to deliver it an awful lot cheaper and faster before it comes anywhere near competitive with just doing it in a redundant, well-staked fashion.